Louisiana, 1964. The American South is embroiled in the heat of the deadliest civil rights clashes ever seen. Thousands of black residents live in terror, afraid that any attempt to vote or voice their opinion could end with their neck on the end of a noose. But this is how it's always been in America. The white elite keep black people under control through violence and intimidation. But today, something different is happening because America isn't ready for what is about to come. Because one group of black men decided they have had enough. The Deacons for Defense had come to teach those Southern bigots a lesson, and when they arrived, everything changed. The same group that had terrorized black communities for generations was finally forced to face something they never expected: armed black men who weren't afraid to shoot back. What followed was a standoff so intense it shook the very foundation of the civil rights movement and redefined what it meant to have black pride. But that wasn't the end, because soon the Deacons would find themselves in the crosshairs of a far more powerful enemy, their own government. Stick around, because today I'm telling the story of how 3 men rewrote the rules for black resistance. Welcome to Bogalusa, Louisiana, a place where the white knights had their fingers in every single pie, including the police force. That's right, the white knights weren't just an outside threat, they were the law. Sheriffs, police chiefs, and city officials openly served in their ranks. If you were black, you could be killed for looking at a white man in the eye, and the killers would sit in the front row of church the next morning. Imagine living in a place where the people meant to protect you were actually trying to kill you. Sound familiar to you? Yeah, some things never change. If you were black and living in the South at the time, chances were you had a target on your back. Just 2 years before Bogalusa, the Birmingham church bombing tragically ended the lives of 4 young black girls. And 4 years earlier, in 1961, Mississippi saw the horrifying murder of Herbert Lee, a black farmer who had been gunned down for attempting to help black citizens register to vote. Lee had built a thriving dairy and cotton businesses, all while supporting his family of 9 children. In all regards, Herbert Lee was a prime example of what black excellence looked like in the South at the time, building success and prosperity in an era where the system was out to dismantle and destroy black power. But you see, none of that mattered to the terrorists and racists of the South. To them, Lee and those girls in Birmingham represented something they couldn't stand: the idea that black people could live and prosper free from the chains of slavery. And in all of this horror, some men decided they had had enough. The Deacons for Defense and Justice were first founded in November 1964 in Jonesboro, Louisiana, a small industrial town in the Deep South under constant siege from white violence. The founding members were Ernest Chilly Willie Thomas, a Korean War veteran, and Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick, a local civil rights activist and minister. These men were working-class black men, military veterans, and defenders of their community who had seen enough racism. Their mission was simple: defend black life, defend black dignity, and do so by any means necessary. With help from Kirkpatrick, 3 black men founded a Deacons chapter in Bogalusa, including Bob Hicks, Charles Sims, and A.Z. Young. They were factory workers, fathers, and veterans, the backbone of Bogalusa's black working class. And when the KLAN came for their community, they traded their time cards for shotguns. The Deacons wasn't born out of aggression. They were born out of necessity. Civil rights workers were being threatened. Black families were under direct threat. And the law, silent, or worse, complicit. These men saw that nonviolence, while noble, could not protect black communities from night riders and burning crosses. Their philosophy was simple: we don't shoot first, but if you come for our people, you will be met with force. In Bogalusa, that philosophy ignited. Charles Sims, a World War II veteran, brought tactical discipline. Hicks opened his home to civil rights workers despite constant death threats. And Young helped organize marches with military-style coordination. They recruited local black men, especially veterans, and established strict rules. No hotheads, no criminals, only responsible men ready to defend, not provoke. Sims considered the Deacons a defense guard unit, stating that the Deacons had been forced simply because we got tired of the women and the children being harassed by white night riders. And can you guess how the white community reacted to this peaceful defense unit? The only way they knew how, with more violence, and of course, another tragic black death. O'Neal Moore, the first African-American deputy sheriff for the Washington Parish in Louisiana, had been brutally eliminated in a drive-by by members of the KLAN. Ernest Ray McElvin, a known white supremacist, was arrested afterwards, but was released on bail a few days later. You see the problem? The Deacons weren't just standing up to the white knights. They were standing up to the entire system of racism that had woven itself into every fabric of American society. The local police, the mayor, even the state. It was black men versus American power. And for once, the black men were armed and ready. And that terrified the system. On July 8, 1965, during a nonviolent march to City Hall, hundreds of white residents surrounded black marchers. Rocks were thrown. Threats were shouted. A young black man named Henry Austin, a 21-year-old Air Force veteran and deacon, stepped forward. As the mob advanced, he raised his rifle and fired a warning shot. When a white man launched toward the group, Austin shot him in the chest 3 times. Both men survived, but the crowd scattered. From that moment on, the Deacons for Defense and Justice were no longer a rumor. They were a presence. They began openly escorting civil rights marchers with rifles over their shoulders and pistols holstered on their hips. No more hiding, no more begging for safety. They were the safety. In the 1966 March Against Fear, the Deacons provided armed bodyguard protection for several notable civil rights leaders, including MLK and Stokely Carmichael. As Charles Sims later reflected, we didn't go looking for trouble, but when they brought it, we finished it. It was clear that the Deacons weren't messing around, and their message about government intervention was heard. No longer could Lyndon B. Johnson ignore the violence going on in the South. The Deacons' presence forced the state of Louisiana to deploy the National Guard and federalize protection for civil rights workers. For the first time, black armed resistance had successfully compelled the U.S. government to intervene against white supremacist violence. And not only that, but the Deacons had forced the government to personally step in and go toe-to-toe with America's most racist group. By the end of 1965, the Deacons for Defense and Justice had done what few thought possible. They forced the federal government to confront America's most racist group in court. This case marked the first time the federal government sought to dismantle a racist organization through legal action. The court found that the Pillow Patrol had engaged in a pattern and practice of intimidating, threatening, and coercing Negro citizens in Washington Parish for the purpose of interfering with their civil rights. The court's injunction prohibited racist groups from engaging in further acts of violence and intimidation. This federal intervention, prompted by the Deacons' resistance, set a precedent for future government actions against white supremacist groups, paving the way for the FBI to designate the KLAN as a terror organization in 1969. But of course, this is America. The FBI consistently targeted black groups such as the Black Panther Party with much more frequency due to, well, them being black. And of course, Hoover couldn't keep his dirty little hands out of the Deacons' business, as you're about to find out. In February of 1965, after an article about the Deacons was published in the New York Times, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally issued a directive to his Louisiana field officers. The message was clear. Because of the potential for violence indicated, you are instructed to immediately initiate an investigation of the Deacons for Defense and Justice. And so began the federal campaign to monitor, undermine, and ultimately neutralize the Deacons through COINTELPRO, the FBI's notorious counterintelligence program originally created to monitor communists. COINTELPRO evolved into a full-blown assault on Black activism in America. While the Deacons were formed to protect Black communities from racial violence, the FBI treated them like domestic enemies. Surveillance reports piled up. Agents infiltrated the group. The Bureau ultimately compiled over 1,500 pages of internal records on the group, much of it collected through informants planted inside their ranks. But here's the kicker. According to Harvey Johnson, one of the last surviving founding members of the Deacons, when the FBI questioned him, they didn't ask a single question about the Klan. They only wanted to know one thing, he said. Where were we getting our weapons from? That wasn't an oversight. That was strategy. To the FBI, armed Black men protecting their communities was more dangerous than white supremacists blowing up churches. While the Deacons worked to keep marches peaceful, the government chose to see them as race warriors. The white media followed suit, painting them as dangerous vigilantes rather than defenders of civil rights. This surveillance and targeting came despite the fact that the Deacons had never initiated violence. Their weapons were legal, their tactics were defensive, but their existence alone, Black men asserting their right to live and protect, was a direct threat to the white power structure. The government's silence on racial terror stood in stark contrast to its obsession with Black resistance. Still, despite the FBI's efforts to destabilize the group, the Deacons forced a level of accountability America couldn't ignore. Their armed presence made the federal government act when it had previously stood by. It made the Klan think twice before launching another daylight attack. And according to civil rights activist Roy Ennis, the Deacons forced the Klan to reevaluate their actions and often change their undergarments. That's what real fear looks like, soiling those white sheets that they so proudly strutted around in. By the late 1960s, the Deacons for Defense and Justice had begun to decline, not because they lost the will to fight, but because the landscape around them was changing rapidly. Their greatest strength, local, grassroots armed defense, was also their greatest vulnerability. The Deacons operated in small chapters with limited resources and no centralized leadership. This made them effective in protecting their local communities, but left them isolated when facing larger structural challenges. The constant pressure of FBI surveillance, the threat of infiltration, and the psychological toll of fighting both Klan and government surveillance wore many members down. The rise of the Black Power movement also shifted the national conversation. Organizations like the Black Panther Party, formed in 1966, took the Deacons' philosophy of armed self-defense and applied it on a larger, more public scale, often in northern and urban environments where the Deacons' rural and southern-based model did not translate as effectively. The Black Panther Party learned from the Deacons. Their community patrols, discipline, and commitment to protecting Black life mirrored the work the Deacons had pioneered. But the Panthers were way more media savvy, national in scope, and deeply involved in revolutionary politics. Yet the legacy of the Deacons for Defense and Justice remains undeniable. They proved that Black self-defense was not only possible, it was necessary. Historian Lance Hill wrote that the Deacons produced real power and self-sustaining organizations in their local communities, forcing local governments to the negotiating tables and altering the balance of power in the Deep South. They may not be as widely known as other civil rights groups, but their impact lives on. In every story of resistance, in every Black community that knows its worth, in every movement that demands dignity through strength, the Deacons for Defense and Justice did not just defend Black life, they redefined it. If you want to learn about another figure who redefined the fight, to defend Black rights, check out our video on Fred Hampton, the man that terrified the FBI.